Good evening, everyone. Today we meet again. We will be discussing about peripheral smear and bone marrow examination. Since this is the last session of the whole seminar that we have been having, or rather webinar, and it is around the dinner time, so we will have a session where it is a case-based discussion rather than discussing theoretical aspects of peripheral smear and bone marrow examination. We have already met before. I am Dr. Shruti Mishra, Assistant Professor in Bone Marrow Transplant and Stem Cell Research Center, IMS, Varanasi. Now, before we begin, I have a disclaimer for all of you. All the patients in which we are going to discuss, even though they are imaginary, they are all have been presented in ICU setup. So imagine they all have come to you in ICU. They are not hematological patients who have walked into the hematological OPD. Okay, so let's start. Case 1. You have got a patient who was admitted with severe anemia. Hemoglobin was a mere 40 gram per liter. And obviously, you asked for a transfusion, but you got an urgent call from your blood bank, and they said that they were not able to do a blood grouping in this patient. Now, what will you do? So, in such a scenario, when such a thing happens, it's better to ask for a peripheral smear examination. So, what it can be seen in such a smear is that if you come across cells like this, which are circular in nature, do not have the central pallor. This is the white structure in the center is the central pallor, which is normally present in all the RBCs because they are discoid in structure. Now, this tiny small circular like cells which do not have a central pallor are basically spherocytes. Now, spherocytes can form whenever there is a chipping off of the RBC membrane, so that whatever rest amount of hemoglobin and the contents is present in the cell, it takes up the form of a spherocyte because that occupies the minimum volume. Okay, now spherocytes can form in two conditions. Whenever there is an inherent membrane defect, like in hereditary spherocytosis, or also in cases of AIHA, that is autoimmune hemolytic anemia, where the membrane is studded with antibodies and that part is chipped up by the macrophages whenever the cell traverses through the spleen. So here we can see that the cells over here are circular and there are spherocytes. And also if you observe carefully, you can see there are certain cells, these three, like this three, even this one, these are having a bluish red color and they're quite larger than the normal cells which are lying around. So what are these cells? These are basically reticulocytes. Now why they are colored like this? They are called polychromatic or polychromatophils also, because they have increased amount of mRNA present in their cytoplasm. Now still their hemoglobin synthesis is still continuing. So reticulocytes are nothing, just the precursor for the mature RBCs. And because they have certain amount of mRNA present in their cytoplasm, this mRNA will take up the basic dye and be bluish in color, and the hemoglobin will take up the acidic part of the dye and be reddish in color. And you will get this polychromatophilic like appearance in the peripheral blood. So from here we can see that the patient has got spherocytes in the peripheral blood and increased retic count. Retic count will obviously be increased whenever there is anemia and the bone marrow is functional. So mostly it is associated when they are in conditions where anemia is associated with hyperproliferative marrows, like in cases of hemorrhage or hemolytic anemias. So we are understanding that this patient is undergoing some sort of a hemolytic anemia. Now next, what will you order? Since we are having a discrepancy in grouping, naturally we can understand there is some sort of an autoantibody that is present. So obviously you can ask for a direct CUM test as well as an indirect CUM test. In this patient, it will come back as positive. And how will we treat a patient of AIHA? We can give them steroids. Now, what to do about the blood transfusion discrepancy that we are having? So, this discrepancy cannot be solved because autoantibodies are present and they are going to interfere with the grouping problems. So, what you can do in such a condition is that if you have the previous blood grouping of the patient, you can take that blood group and try matching it with the patient and get a least incompatible blood for transfusion sake. Otherwise, you can do a extensive cross matching and get the least incompatible blood for that particular patient of yours. Okay, now let's move on to the next case. You have another patient who presented with giddiness and it resulted in a fall. Because of the fall, the patient had a head injury. Now the patient is now in the ICU. You got a call from your nurse that they are not able to draw the blood sample properly. Whenever they are trying to draw, it looks like a mucoid like appearance or mucoid like structure is seen in the sample that they are drawing, and they are having a lot of difficulty in it. So what can you do? So here, if you see this patient in the sample itself, you can see there are a lot of clumpings. Now, such kind of a large amount of agglutination of the RBCs, which is clearly visible to the naked eye, is usually seen in cases associated with cold agglutination. Now, what we can do is that we can do a warm collection, that is collection of the blood sample at 37 degrees centigrade and warm transport of the sample to the lab. Other than that, if you do a routine collection also, what will happen is that mostly whenever we do a peripheral smear in these patients, we can see the cells clumping grossly whenever a slide is prepared. So this is how our normal cells should be looking like, and this is how they will look like when they are in the room temperature. Now, same sample, if you warm it up at 37 degrees centigrade and then make a smear, again it will become normalized. In such a case, whenever the agglutination is present so extensively, the machines will give a false increased MCV. So if ever you get a call from the lab that the MCV of the patient is way too high, like 138 femtoliter, 142 femtoliter, etc., then please ask them to check for agglutination in the peripheral smear. So this is how the smear will look like, where there is extensive clumping or agglutination of the RBCs. Now this is not a deeper end of the area of the slide. This is the actual near the tail end where we should be examining the slide, and this type of a condition is seen whenever there is increased amount of cold agglutinin present in the blood. Now, how are you supposed to manage this patient? So obviously this patient has got a history of hyperviscosity, and then we are suspecting that it is a case of Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia. Now, what is happening in Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia? There is a lymphoplasmacytic lymphoma per se, or it is associated with there is a lymphoma, B cell lymphoma basically, which is associated with increased production of IgM. Now, this IgM is causing hyperviscosity. Now, if hyperviscosity is symptomatically present, you should go for an urgent plasmapheresis. And if that is not present, you can confirm the case by doing a MYD 88 or mid 88 status. Now, once it has been confirmed, treatment is including a combination of drugs where you can use rituximab, since it is a B cell lymphoma or B cell neoplasm which is giving rise to this. Then rituximab is mostly put into the combination, whatever combination you are trying to give. Steroids can be added like dexamethasone, and other drugs like bortezomib, bendamustine, cyclophosphamide, ibrutinib, all these things can be given in combination for treating these patients. Now coming to the next case. Now, Waldenstrom is not that common a presentation. What is more common? Obviously, it's myeloma. So, say you have a 51-year-old female patient. She presented to you with severe pain abdomen. You kick-started all the lab parameters. You sent all the tests. Serum calcium came back markedly increased. It was 14 milligram per deciliter. So, what will you do next? Now, always go for a peripheral smear examination. Here in myeloma, because of presence of increased gamma globulins, there will be a bluish discoloration of the smear which can be seen once the slides are stained. So this is how our normal slides will look like, and this is how a slide of a patient of myeloma smear will look like. And what happens in the peripheral smear? Peripheral smear, you will see rouleau formation. So agglutination is clumping of the cells together. There is no particular order in which they are clumping, but rouleau formation is where they are stacked together one above the other like a coin stack. So this rouleau formation is quite characteristic of hypergamma-globulinemias, and that is mainly seen in multiple myeloma. And here in the smear, you can even appreciate there is a plasmacytoid cell. That means a lymphoid cell which is looking like a plasma cell. Okay. Now, if a bone marrow is done, we can see that the marrow is full of plasma cells. So this is a clear-cut case of multiple myeloma. Now, how can we confirm the diagnosis further? You can go for an SPEP where you will get the gamma peak, gamma globulin chain peak, or monoclonal gammopathy. And then if you do a IFE, you can see that this particular IFE gel card, if you try to read, we can see that it is having a clonality for IgG and lambda. So IgG lambda is the clone of the immunoglobulin which is being synthesized in this particular patient. Now treatment, I won't delve into the treatment part per se. You know it far better than me. So treatment of multiple myeloma, you will have to give chemotherapy in combination. You can give melphalan and various other drugs that you are all aware of better than me. So let's move on to the next case. So you have already retired for the night. Suddenly you got a critical alert from the lab saying that one of your patients is having a very high sodium potassium level. नींद उड़ गया, you start running, you repeat the CBG for the patient and you do the ECG. Everything came back normal. Now, what is happening exactly over here? You got a critical alert from the lab, but when you repeat things, it's coming back normal. So, what exactly is happening? Are the lab people doing something wrong? Have they done some mistakes? Have they mixed the samples or something? Okay, in such a scenario, always check for a PS. So in this case, it was a increased platelet count. So there was thrombocytosis. So it is a known fact that whenever there is an increased cell count, these cells will degenerate whenever the sample is stored for some time. Now, whatever tests we are doing in the lab, whenever you send a sample, it is not being immediately tested. It will take a few hours before the test is being performed. And it is known fact that whenever blood is stored, like you have always seen also that it is one of the complications when you transfuse very old bags of RBC to a patient. What happens? The cells will degenerate and the potassium leaks out into the bag. So once you transfuse such a thing, there will be sharp increase in the potassium level on the patient on which you are transfusing that. Similarly, in this patient, what is happening? Because there is thrombocytosis, the platelets will degenerate because once the sample has been taken out of the blood and is being stored for being tested, and this potassium will give rise to a spurious increase in potassium level when they are testing in the lab. So nobody is wrong over here. The lab is not wrong in alerting you, and you are also not wrong in finding a correct CBG count and no abnormality in the ECG once you have tested the patient again. Okay, so this is just a thing. Whenever you have got a spurious or a discrepant level in serum potassium level, please ask or please check the PS and check the counts. Okay, next case. Till now we have seen discrepant calcium level, discrepant potassium level. Let's throw something else in the mix. Say you have a patient with high uric acid level, 20 milligram per deciliter. You do the serum LDH, it came back as 5100 international units per liter, which is very high. Now what? Obviously you understand that it is a case of tumor lysis syndrome. So there are few hematological malignancies which can give rise to tumor lysis syndrome. The most common being Burkitt's lymphoma or Burkitt's leukemia. Now, Burkitt's leukemia, if you do a peripheral smear, they will have this characteristic finding, which is this type of cells are called the L3 type of lymphoblast, which are large in size, have abundant amount of blue cytoplasm, which you can appreciate over here, and the cytoplasm will be vacuolated. So unlike the L1 and L2 type of blasts, which will have scant amount of cytoplasm, these cells are quite huge. They are very big in size. They will have moderate to abundant amount of bluish cytoplasm and vacuolations in the cytoplasm. So that is quite characteristic of this Burkitt leukemia patients. Now, if you send a sample for flow cytometry, you can see that this patient was having CD10 and CD19 positivity, and there was a kappa restriction, and FISH showed a translocation of 814, so confirming a diagnosis of Burkitt's leukemia. Now, how do you treat a tumor lysis syndrome? Naturally, you have to do hydration, and you have to give some drugs like allopurinol or rasburicase to reduce the uric acid level. Okay, so you have done everything. Following morning, you sent a sample again for serum uric acid level. It came back as 3.2, or rather, it usually comes back as 0.5 or 1 milligram per deciliter. So, should you start celebrating that you have cured your patient of hyperuricemia? No, don't celebrate as of yet. Why? Because rasburicase keeps on acting in vitro. So once you have drawn a sample, and if you are not analyzing it within 5 to 10 minutes, then because of the action of this rasburicase, the serum uric acid level in the sample that you have drawn will keep on reducing, and you will get this high, means get this abnormally low levels like 0.5 or even 1 milligram per deciliter. So how to rectify this thing? So if you are collecting the sample in room temperature, try to analyze it within 5 to 10 minutes. If you are not able to analyze it that fast, so better collect it at 4 degrees centigrade and maintain the cold chain for transportation of the sample till it is being analyzed. So that can check the spurious low serum uric acid level because of the action of rasburicase. Okay, now let's move on. You have another patient. You got a critical alert from your lab. The patient, people say that lab people say the patient is having a markedly low platelet count. It is less than 10,000. Hardly any platelets are there. But your patient is not bleeding. The patient has been admitted for some other reason other than hematological conditions. Patient is not bleeding at all. You try checking up on the patient, the coagulation parameters, everything was normal. So in such a scenario, what can you do? You should ask for a peripheral smear examination. So what happens? EDTA in the blood can activate PF4 or platelet factor 4 antibodies. So what will happen? This platelet will start clumping with each other. So platelet clumping and platelet satellitism, that is clustering of these platelets along the surface of the neutrophils, is quite commonly seen in samples which are stored for long in EDTA before being analyzed. And in patients in which this antibody production is more, what you can do is, if you really want a corrected count, you can give a sample in citrate, sodium citrate. Okay. So always ask for a peripheral smear examination whenever there is a case of thrombocytopenia being reported from the lab, but the patient is not having any bleeding. I hope nobody in the audience is going to mind this thing, but it is a feature which is commonly seen that Bengali patients, if you run the sample, you will get a thrombocytopenia from the machine. Now, if you make a smear and you will examine it, we can see that these patients usually have macrothrombocytes. That means large or giant size platelet. Giant size is that size where the platelet are almost equal to the size of the RBCs or slightly larger than that. So macrothrombocyte is very common in Bengali patients, and if you have such a patient with you and the lab reports is telling that there is thrombocytopenia, so better get the smear examined and get a corrected count for the platelets in such patients. Now coming to the next case, a young adult presented with myocardial infarction. You did send the lab parameters. Hemoglobin was 188 gram per liter, which is very high. Now you did a obviously suspicion over here was polycythemia. You did a bone marrow examination which showed hyperproliferation, and there was panmylosis, that means increase in all the lineages, and mostly you can see that the erythroids, these are the erythroids, the dark blue cells, the myeloids, these are the myeloids, the reddish cytoplasm, like you can see, those are the myeloids, and these are the megakaryocytes. These big large ones are the megakaryocytes. All are increased simultaneously in the marrow. So panmylosis, where all the lineages are increased, is a feature of polycythemia vera. Now there is the diagnostic criteria by WHO. You can just follow that, and polycythemia vera can be diagnosed in this manner. So coming to the next case, you have a 32-year-old male presented with priapism, and it has been lasting for last 16 hours. You send the lab parameters. Hemoglobin was a slightly less, 105 gram per liter. TLC was very high. The patient was having 4.5 lakh count. Platelet was normal. Now what to do? Obviously ask for a PS examination, and the PS looked like a bone marrow, where you can see that there is the whole lineage of the neutrophils, starting from the precursors to mature neutrophils, myelocytes, metamyelocytes, band cells, everything is visible over here. This is a eosinophilic eosinophilic myelocyte. Platelets are also high. This is a basophil over here. So overall, everything is increased. Now, obviously, in such a case, it is highly likely that it is a case of CML. And how do we confirm a cases of CML? Obviously, we have to do hematological examinations like morphological assay of the peripheral blood and bone marrow. And then we will send cytogenetics for translocation 922, that is the Philadelphia chromosome translocation, which can be assayed by conventional karyotype. This is the conventional karyotype, and this is FISH, and also molecular confirmation. Now, for following up with the patient, naturally, we need quantitative PCR. For that, baseline PCR is mandatory. So this is how we do a diagnosis of CML, and obviously the sensitivity of the molecular method is far better than cytogenetics, which is also far better than hematology. So bone marrow examination is a very painful procedure. Okay, always remember one thing. If you at all have to do a bone marrow aspiration in your setup, please try to collect all the samples in a single go. First, collect a very small quantity, that is around 0.5 ml, and prepare smears, and then do a second draw. Send the samples for flow cytometry, cytogenetics, and molecular analysis. Collect all the samples together. Do not just collect a sample for only bone marrow aspirate examination, then again do the procedure for molecular confirmation. This is going to be really troublesome for the patient because it's a painful procedure. Try to finish it in one go itself. Okay. Now, if you think it is all Latin and Greek, so only remember one thing. Now this same principle you can apply for ET, where thrombocytosis patient that we had, it can also be a case of essential thrombocytosis. And the polycythemia vera patient that we had, every myeloproliferative neoplasm has to be worked up in the same way. You have to do hematological examinations, you have to do cytogenetics, and you have to do molecular assay. Once you do a molecular assay, most importantly, if you don't have anything, you give a BCR-ABL. If the BCR-ABL comes back as positive, nothing to worry, it's a case of CML. If it is BCR-ABL negative, then it is some other MPN. Then what we can do, we can give a panel for JAK2 mutations. If JAK2 mutations are present, then according to the features in the bone marrow, if it is a panmyelosis, it is polycythemia vera. If it is only a proliferation of megakaryocytes, it is essential thrombocytosis. Now, if JAK2 mutations are not there, and even JAK2 exon 12 mutation is not there, then what we will do, we will give for the extensive MPN panel, that means you give for MPL and gal reticulin mutation analysis. So that will rule out your pre-fibrotic stages of primary myelofibrosis. Okay, so this is how we go for the workup of these patients, of any myeloproliferative neoplasm patients. Now, if you think everything is Latin and Greek, so always remember the rule of thumb is whenever there is an increase in blood cells which are not lymphocytes and not blasts, do a BCR-ABL. If it is positive, give imatinib. If it is negative, do a MPN molecular panel. That's it. Just remember this much. Coming to the next case, you have a 30-year-old man who was admitted with sudden onset of dyspnea and orthopnea. You asked for a chest CT and an X-ray. The patient was proven to be having a superior vena cava syndrome and there was mediastinal widening. You do the lab parameters. Hemoglobin was low, 95 gram per liter. Total count was bit raised. It was 20,000. Platelet count was normal. So on peripheral smear examination, there were blasts present in the peripheral blood, and when a marrow was done, it was completely studded with blasts. So in such a patient, next step will be to do a flow cytometry. So mostly it is usually seen whenever there is a mediastinal mass with a superior vena cava syndrome and acute leukemia. So mostly this will be the T cell leukemias which can present like this. So you confirm the diagnosis, do a flow cytometry, do cytogenetics, confirm your diagnosis and treat accordingly to the type of leukemia that you are facing with. Now let's move on to the next case. You have a 45-year-old male patient who was referred to you with anemia and thrombocytopenia, and there was mild leukocytosis. He was bleeding from all port sites. So you did a coagulation parameter. Coagulation came back. There was a slightly deranged INR. APTT was deranged. Fibrinogen was markedly low and D-dimer was raised. So from these parameters, you can understand that the coagulation defect that this patient is having is DIC. Now, is this DIC primary or is this secondary to something? So one other parameter which you can see is abnormal over here is mild leukocytosis. So in such a case, a peripheral smear examination is mandatory. Okay, so on peripheral smear, you can see the presence of this broken RBCs, which are called the cystocytes, which is confirming your diagnosis of DIC. Now, this DIC is secondary to a leukemia, that is another hematological emergency like Burkitt's. This is the acute promyelocytic leukemia. So these are the abnormal promyelocytes. This is the hypergranular variant where we can see that the cells are large with abundant granular cytoplasm and multiple oil rods present in the cytoplasm. A cell with multiple oil rods is called Fagot cells. Fagot cells are quite characteristic and pathognomic of acute promyelocytic leukemia. Now, how to treat such patients? Usually ATO, ATRA, all this arsenic trioxide or ATRA is given for the treatment. Chemo is mostly not required, but you have to maintain hydration and see how to manage the DIC for the patient. Since this is a secondary DIC, obviously from the last lecture you must be remembering the cornerstone is you have to treat the cause. The cause over here is the leukemia. Okay. So let's move on. The next case, we have a 8-year-old boy who presented with weakness on the left side of the upper and lower limb, which was acute in onset and non-progressive. The coagulation parameters were normal. So what can you do next? So on PS examination, this elongated cells with sharp borders are seen. So these are nothing but sickle cells. In Odisha, it's quite common. where people coming from Western Odisha are usually having homozygous sickle cell anemia. So once you get sickle cells in the peripheral smear, your diagnosis is more or less complete. But for treatment purposes, you might have to do a HPLC. The HPLC of this patient shows the S window is having a 72% of HbS concentration. So how can you treat such a patient? Mostly it is preferred that if you are going to anesthetize a patient, we can do a exchange transfusion so as to uh, make the HbS concentration less than 40 to 30%. Okay, so that depends upon the anesthetist over there if any procedure has to be done. Now, normally, how do you exchange how much some blood should be used? So it's a very complicated calculation, but if you see, if you have a strong sickler with more than 80% of HbS concentration and highly sickling, and the body weight of the patient is around say 60 or 70 kg, so you can use 2 units per 15 kg of the body weight. Okay, so 2 units per 15 kg. So if you have a 60 kg weight of a patient, you will require 8 units of blood for exchange transfusion. Now, repeat HPLCs can be done to see whether your S concentration has reduced to the level that you want. And different people prefer different levels. Like if an anesthetist might want, if a procedure has to be done, they might prefer less than 30%. Some can work up with less than 40% also. Okay, so this is how you go about for this particular case. Now, how will you what other considerations that can be done? Mostly for reducing the sickling, you can also give hydroxyurea, and obviously a definitive treatment in all these patients will be to do a bone marrow transplant. Okay, now next you have a 30-year-old woman. She had seizures postpartum and she presented to you with altered sensorium. Lab reports said that the platelet count was low, but PT-APTT was normal. So what to do? Obviously, peripheral smear examination. So peripheral smear shows an increased amount of cystocytes. Now this picture has been taken from the new ICSH guidelines and recommendations for cystocyte detection, where all this variety, be it microspherocytes, be it helmet cells, be it keratinocyte like cells, everything is considered as a part of cystocytes. Okay, so what are the cutoff levels for diagnosing TAM or TMA or thrombotic microangiopathy? So we have to count 1000 RBCs. If it is more than 1%, if cystocyte percentage is more than 1, and in premature if it is more than 5%, then highly you are dealing with a case of thrombotic microangiopathy. So these are the cutoff values which has been recommended and which has been proved useful by the recent upgraded recommendation of ICSH. Now, next you have a 3-year-old young child who presented with dengue. On day 6, all the counts started falling rapidly and the patient had to be shifted to ICU. You sent the lab reports. It came back as pancytopenia. Serum ferritin was skyrocketing. It was 8,364. Serum fibrinogen was low. Serum triglycerides was increased. So I think you have got an idea where we are heading to. Yeah, we are discussing about HLH. So HLH is quite commonly seen secondary to infections, and in the bone marrow there were increased macrophages which were present in clusters, and here you can see there are RBCs present in the cytoplasm of the macrophage which is proving erythrophagocytosis, and here you can see intact WBCs and degenerated nucleus of the lymphoid cells present in the cytoplasm of the macrophage. So the diagnosis of HLH is confirmed. I am not going into the detailed treatment of HLH. Obviously, you have to treat them with steroids and all. and controlling the primary disease. So that's all for today. Keep calm and love hematology. Thank you everyone for your kind attention. I'll be happy to take up any questions now.